Monday, April 20th, 2026, 4:52 in the afternoon. An earthquake of magnitude 7.7 strikes off the Sanriku coast of northeastern Japan. Buildings in Tokyo, hundreds of kilometers to the south, sway for 7 minutes. A tsunami warning is issued for waves up to 3 meters. Evacuation orders go out to 180,000 people. 2 people are injured, no one dies. The warning system works, but the Japan Meteorological Agency does not stand down. Instead, it issues a subsequent earthquake advisory, a formal warning that the probability of an even larger earthquake striking the same region has increased tenfold. That advisory is in effect as you watch this.
At 11:58 a.m., the first tremor, measuring 7.9 in magnitude, wrought havoc downtown.
Japan experiences approximately 1,500 earthquakes every year. It accounts for nearly 20% of the world's earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 or greater. Every person who lives there understands, at some level, that the ground beneath their feet is not stable. They go about their lives anyway. They have to, but there is a difference between the ordinary seismic background noise of a country that lives on the ring of fire and what Japan is facing right now. The country is not simply earthquake-prone, it is overdue, and the scientists who study Japan's fault systems have a specific term for the event they believe is coming. They don't call it a risk, they don't call it a possibility, they call it a matter of when. To understand what that means, what it really means, at human scale, you have to go back 103 years. Because the future of Tokyo has already happened once, and the story of what it looked like, what it destroyed, and what it revealed about this country is something that most people outside Japan have never fully been told. September 1st, 1923. Shortly before noon, the port city of Yokohama, Japan's largest harbor and its gateway to the Western world. Down at the docks, hundreds of people have gathered to see off the Empress of Australia, a 615-foot luxury steamship bound for Vancouver. Ellis Zacharias, a young American naval officer standing on the pier, remembers the exact moment the earthquake hit. "The smiles vanished," he wrote, "and for an appreciable instant everyone stood transfixed by the sound of unearthly thunder." Moments later, a tremendous jolt knocked him off his feet. The pier collapsed, spilling cars and people into the water. Otis Manchester Poole, an American manager of a trading firm, stepped out of his office near the waterfront and faced a scene he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe. Over everything had settled a thick white dust, he remembered years later, and through the yellow fog of dust, still in the air, a copper-colored sun shone upon this silent havoc in sickly reality. The initial quaking lasted approximately 14 seconds. 14 seconds was enough to destroy nearly every building in Yokohama, a city built on soft, waterlogged ground that amplified the shaking into something its structures could not survive. The Grand Hotel, an elegant Victorian landmark on the seafront that had hosted Rudyard Kipling, W. Somerset Maugham, and William Howard Taft, collapsed, crushing hundreds of guests and employees. The city's most celebrated gathering places pancaked. The ground cracked open in long, jagged fissures that people had to navigate on foot to reach higher ground. The Sagami Trough is a subduction zone sitting roughly 100 kilometers south of Tokyo, where the Philippine Sea Plate converges beneath the Okhotsk Plate. On the morning of September 1st, the Philippine Sea Plate lurched 3.5 meters horizontally in a matter of seconds. Parts of the Mura Peninsula were thrust 8 meters upward. A 60 by 60 mile segment of the seafloor ruptured and thrust itself against the continental plate, releasing energy equivalent to nearly 400 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The rupture did not happen in a single shock. Modern seismological analysis confirms 3 separate events within minutes of each other. The initial megathrust in Kanagawa, followed 3 minutes later by a magnitude 7.2 earthquake beneath Tokyo Bay. Then, a magnitude 7.3 in Yamanashi Prefecture 2 minutes after that. Survivor accounts consistently describe feeling all 3. Each one alone would have been among the most catastrophic earthquakes in Japanese recorded history. Together, their combined magnitude is estimated between 7.9 and 8.2. The ground beneath Tokyo and Yokohama did not simply shake, it convulsed. Buildings collapsed instantly across both cities. Bridges failed. A tsunami driven by the seafloor rupture struck the Miura and Boso peninsulas, depositing boats well inland and dragging people and structures out to sea. But the earthquake and the tsunami together were not what killed most people. What happened next began within 15 minutes of the first shock, and it started with something entirely ordinary: lunch. It was lunchtime. Across Tokyo and Yokohama, hundreds of thousands of small charcoal and gas cooking fires were burning simultaneously in homes, restaurants, and street stalls across both cities. The cities were built almost entirely of wood. The ground had been dry for weeks. The air was warm, and every single cooking fire in every building that collapsed was knocked over at the same moment. Within 15 minutes, 136 separate fires were burning simultaneously across Tokyo and Yokohama. The water mains had been severed by the earthquake. The fire department had no water. A typhoon sitting offshore was feeding the city's winds that gusted to over 80 kilometers per hour. And those winds were doing something that turned individual fires into something far more dangerous. They were merging them. By mid-afternoon, the separate fires had combined into firestorms. Not fires, firestorms. The distinction is not semantic. A firestorm generates its own wind system, pulling oxygen inward from all directions to feed itself. It creates a self-sustaining atmospheric event that cannot be extinguished from outside. It generates temperatures that melt metal. It turns the air itself into something that cannot be breathed. The fires of the 1923 Great Kantō Earthquake burned for 2 days across both cities. 87% of all deaths in the 1923 earthquake were caused not by the earthquake, but by fire. That number needs a moment to sit. The deadliest earthquake to ever strike Japan's most populated region, an earthquake that collapsed buildings, generated a tsunami, and cracked the ground open across 2 cities, killed most of its victims through fire. And the single most devastating moment of the entire disaster did not happen in the chaos of the first hours. It happened at a place where people believed they were safe. The Honjo Army Clothing Depot was a large open space near the Sumida River in eastern Tokyo. When the fires began spreading through the wooden city, 40,000 people fled there. They came on foot through streets where buildings were still falling, carrying their children, their elderly relatives, whatever possessions they had managed to grab. An open space, away from the wooden structures, away from the collapsing walls. It was the logical place to survive. What none of them could have anticipated was what the surrounding firestorms were about to create directly above the open ground where they were sheltering. A fire tornado, generated by the convergence of superheated air currents rising from the firestorms on all sides, rotating as it ascended, pulling everything beneath it upward. Of the 40,000 people who had gathered at the clothing depot for safety, approximately 300 survived. 38,700 people died at a single location in a single afternoon. The Tokyo Metropolitan Memorial Hall now stands on that exact site in Yokohama Park. The remains of 58,000 victims are enshrined there, not only from the clothing depot, but from across the entire disaster zone, because the scale of death was so large that individual burial was not always possible. The building exists because there were too many dead to bury individually. The confirmed death toll from the 1923 Great Kantō Earthquake is 105,385 people. An additional 13,275 were still listed as missing 1 year later. 2.5 million people were left homeless. And before the fires had finished burning, something else had already begun. Within hours of the earthquake, rumors began moving through the surviving population. Korean residents, it was said, were poisoning wells, starting fires deliberately, carrying bombs. Every single one of these rumors was false. They were fabricated in a population that had been stripped of every normal social structure in a matter of hours, traumatized, displaced, and cut off from any means of verification. But the rumors moved faster than the truth, and they moved with the explicit assistance of parts of the Japanese government and military. Vigilante groups called Jikidan formed across the Kanto region. By mid-September, an estimated 3,689 such groups were operating, many of them armed by the authorities. They stopped people on the streets and tested them. Could they pronounce certain Japanese words in the way that native speakers pronounced them? Those who could not were assumed to be Korean. Those assumed to be Korean were killed. The victims included Chinese residents, Okinawans, and Japanese people from regions whose accents sounded unfamiliar. The killings continued for 3 weeks. The confirmed death toll varies depending on the source because the records were deliberately destroyed. Official Japanese police figures counted 248 deaths. A Korean government investigation found 832. Korean student researchers estimated over 2,600. Modern scholarly consensus reaches 6,000. The range exists not because of historical uncertainty, but because of systematic concealment. Concealment that began in September 1923 and has never been fully reversed. In 2017, Tokyo Metropolitan Governor Yuriko Koike stopped offering official condolences to the descendants of the massacre victims, breaking decades of precedent. In April 2017, the Cabinet Office deleted historical evidence and acknowledgement of the massacre from their official website. The Japanese national government has never formally acknowledged what happened. The story is not history. It is a living political wound that the earthquake tore open and that no one in power has chosen to close. If you find yourself wanting to know more about the history that powerful institutions would rather leave in the footnotes, about the science that has consequences for millions of people, consider subscribing. This channel exists to tell these stories completely without cutting the parts that make people uncomfortable. Subscribing is how you make sure you don't miss the next one. The Sagami Trough has not ruptured significantly since September 1st, 1923. The strain that was released that morning has been accumulating again for over 100 years. The Philippine Sea Plate moves at between 2 and 5 centimeters per year. It does not pause. It does not rest. It has been moving continuously in the same direction for the entire century since it last let go. Tokyo is now 10 times larger than it was in 1923. 37 million people live in the metropolitan area. The fault has not moved. Modern projections estimate economic losses of $331 billion from a repeat Sagami Trough event, 3 times the damage caused by the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the most expensive natural disaster in recorded history. Government models project up to 23,000 deaths. A separate scenario modeling a magnitude 7.3 earthquake directly beneath Tokyo projects 18,000 deaths, with 2/3 of them caused not by the initial shaking, but by post-earthquake fire. The same mechanism that killed 87% of the victims in 1923 remains the primary projected cause of death in Tokyo today. Japan has not been passive in the century since. Building codes are among the strictest in the world. After the 1995 Kobe earthquake killed 6,434 people and exposed critical weaknesses in older construction, Japan undertook a nationwide retrofit program. The streets of Tokyo are wider than they were in 1923, designed specifically to act as fire breaks. The early warning system can detect a major earthquake and send alerts to mobile phones across the country in seconds. These measures will save hundreds of thousands of lives compared to 1923. The scientists say so clearly and without hesitation. They also say it will not be enough to prevent one of the most catastrophic events in the history of the modern world. And then there is the second fault, the one that has nothing to do with Tokyo and everything to do with Japan. The Nankai Trough runs along the Pacific coast of Japan, southwest of the Sagami Trough. It is a different fault system, a different subduction zone, the same Philippine Sea Plate pressing against the continental plate from a different angle. It is capable of producing a magnitude 8 to 9 earthquake, larger than anything the Sagami Trough has generated in recorded history. Large magnitude Nankai Trough earthquakes have struck roughly every 100 to 200 years for the past 1,400 years. The most recent significant event was 1946. The next one is not a question of science, it is a question of timing. In January 2025, Japan's government revised its probability estimate for a Nankai Trough megaquake, between 75 and 82% within the next 30 years. A government experts panel released new damage projections in March 2025. Worst case, 298,000 deaths. Economic damage of approximately $2 trillion US. The previous estimate from 2012 projected 323,000 deaths. After more than a decade of investment in preparedness, the new figure is lower. The decrease was less than 10%. In August 2024, Japan issued its first ever Nankai Trough megaquake advisory, triggered by a magnitude 7.1 earthquake off the coast of Miyazaki. It was not a prediction. Japanese scientists are careful to say that earthquakes cannot be predicted. It was an elevated alert, a formal acknowledgement that the probability of a major event had temporarily increased. Trains were canceled, beaches were closed, convenience stores sold out of emergency supplies within hours. A country that lives with this knowledge every day felt the weight of it become, for 1 week, impossible to ignore. The advisory was lifted after 1 week. The probability did not go with it. What makes Japan's situation unique in the world is not simply that it sits on one of the most seismically active locations on Earth. It is that the country knows, with a precision that no other nation has achieved, exactly what is coming and roughly when. The fault systems are mapped. The strain accumulation is measured. The historical record extends 1,400 years. Japan has done more than any country in history to prepare its population for what is coming. And the scientists who study these faults will tell you without hesitation that all of that preparation is not enough. The Sagami Trough last moved on September 1st, 1923, at 11:58 in the morning. Ellis Zacharias was climbing out of Yokohama Harbor. Otis Manchester Poole was looking at a copper-colored sun through a fog of white dust. 38,000 people were dying on an open field near the Sumida River, and 105,385 people were in the process of becoming the dead, mostly through fire in a city they had been eating lunch in 12 minutes earlier. The Philippine Sea Plate is still moving. The strain is still accumulating. The fault does not know that Tokyo now holds 37 million people instead of 3.7 million. It does not know about the building codes, the fire breaks, the early warning systems, or the emergency stockpiles. It knows nothing about what happened in September 1923 or about the century of work done to make sure it would never be that bad again. The fault only knows one thing, that it has not moved in over 100 years, and that at some point it will. The ground does not warn you. History does. That is the only warning there is.